The rifle blast shattered the morning silence, and Grace Owens watched from the hillside as the woman near his creek threw herself flat against the rocky ground, her campfire scattering embers across the dry grass. He lowered the Winchester, cursing himself for the warning shot that had clearly terrified rather than announced his presence, and urged his horse down the slope toward where the stranger lay motionless beside her meager belongings. The summer of 1885 had been brutal in southeastern Utah, and Grace had grown accustomed to running off drifters and cattle thieves from his property outside Moab. But something about the small figure pressed against the earth made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar feeling that might have been regret. "Get up," he called out, keeping his voice steady as he approached. "I am not going to hurt you if you leave peacefully." The figure stirred, and Grace realized with a start that the person before him was a woman. She pushed herself up on trembling arms, and when she turned to face him, he saw eyes the color of sage after rain, wide with fear but holding a defiant spark that caught him off guard. Her dark hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder, and her clothes, though dusty and worn, had once been of decent quality. She could not have been more than 23 or 24 years old, and the hollowness in her cheeks spoke of too many missed meals. "I am sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "I did not know anyone claimed this land. I will go." Grace dismounted, keeping the rifle pointed down but still in his hands. He was 30 years old and had lived alone on this ranch for the past 5 years, ever since his father had died and his mother had gone back east to live with her sister. In all that time, he had never encountered anyone quite like this woman who looked at him as though she expected him to strike her down where she stood. "Where are your people?" he asked. "I have no people." She began gathering her few possessions with quick, practiced movements. A threadbare bedroll, a dented tin cup, a small satchel that looked nearly empty. "I have nowhere to belong." The words struck something deep in Grace's chest, an echo of his own loneliness that he had buried beneath years of hard work and isolation. He studied her more carefully now, noting the determined set of her jaw beneath the fear, the way her hands shook slightly as she rolled up her blanket. "What is your name?" he heard himself ask. She hesitated, as though even that small piece of information was dangerous to give away. "Felicity Burke." "Miss Burke, when did you last eat?" The question seemed to surprise her. She straightened, meeting his gaze with those remarkable eyes. "I caught a rabbit 3 days ago, 3 days." Grace looked at her campfire, saw no sign of any food, noticed the way she swayed slightly on her feet. He made a decision that would change both their lives, though he did not know it yet. "Come up to the house," he said. "Get some food in you before you move on. I do not accept charity." "It is not charity. It is common decency, and my mother would rise from her grave to haunt me if I let a woman starve on my property." He softened his tone. "Please, just a meal and then you can decide where you are going." Felicity looked at him for a long moment, and Grace had the unsettling sensation that she was seeing right through to his core, measuring his worth in some way he did not quite understand. Finally, she nodded once, a sharp dip of her chin. "One meal. Then I will leave you in peace." Grace led the way back toward his ranch house, very aware of Felicity walking several paces behind him, leading her small pack on her back like a turtle carrying its home. The house came into view as they crested the ridge, a solid structure of wood and stone that his father had built with his own hands. The barn stood nearby, and the corrals held a dozen horses that represented years of careful breeding and training. It was a good ranch, prosperous by the standards of this harsh country, but it felt emptier with each passing year. Inside, the house was clean but sparse, with the kind of order that spoke of a solitary man's habits. Grace gestured for Felicity to sit at the wooden table while he stoked the fire in the stove and began pulling out supplies. Bacon, eggs, fresh bread he had baked 2 days earlier, butter, coffee. He felt her watching him as he worked, and when he glanced over his shoulder, he caught her looking around the room with an expression he could not quite read. "You live here alone?" she asked. "For 5 years now." "My father built this place, but he passed, and my mother could not stand the isolation. It must be hard, managing everything yourself." "I manage." He cracked eggs into the pan, and the sizzle filled the kitchen with a homey sound. "What about you? How did you end up camping on my land with nothing but a bedroll and an empty stomach?" Felicity was quiet for so long that Grace thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My parents died of fever last winter in Colorado. I had a brother, but he was killed in a mining accident 6 months ago. I had been working as a seamstress, but the shop closed, and my landlord said I could stay if I would." She trailed off, but Grace understood well enough what the landlord had wanted. "I left instead. I have been traveling south, trying to find work, trying to find somewhere that might feel like home." Grace set a plate in front of her, piled high with food. He watched as she stared at it for a moment before picking up her fork with shaking hands. She ate slowly at first, as though her body had forgotten how to process real food, then faster as hunger overtook pride. "Thank you," she said when she had finished, and there were tears in her eyes. "You cannot know what this means." "I think I can." Grace poured coffee for both of them and sat across from her. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes in the air and painting Felicity's face with golden light. She was beautiful, he realized, but it was more than that. There was a strength in her that called to something in him, a recognition of kindred spirits shaped by loss and survival. "I need help here on the ranch," he heard himself say, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "The house needs proper keeping, and I cannot manage the cooking and cleaning along with all the work outside. I could offer you room and board, and a small wage besides." Felicity set down her coffee cup carefully. "You do not know anything about me. I know you are honest enough to tell me you were camping on my land without permission. I know you are proud enough to refuse charity even when you are starving. I know you have nowhere to go, and I have a place that needs tending." He met her eyes. "I am not asking anything improper. You would have your own room and your own space. Just help around the house, and you will have a safe place to stay." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Grace considered the question, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Because I know what it is like to feel like you do not belong anywhere. And because this ranch is too big for one person to tend alone and too quiet for any soul to bear without going a little mad." Felicity smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her whole face. "I am a good cook, and I can mend anything. My mother taught me to sew before she died. Then we have a deal." She extended her hand across the table. "We have a deal, Mr. Owens." "Grace," he said, taking her hand. Her palm was calloused but small in his, and he felt a current of something electric pass between them at the touch. "Just Grace." "Then I am Felicity. Just Felicity." Over the following weeks, the ranch transformed in ways that Grace had not anticipated. Felicity proved to be everything she had promised and more. The house began to smell of fresh bread and herb-roasted meat. Curtains appeared in the windows, sewn from fabric she found in his mother's old trunk. The garden, which Grace had let go wild, sprouted neat rows of vegetables under her careful tending. But more than the physical changes, there was a lightness in the air that had not existed before, a sense of life returning to a place that had been merely existing. Grace found himself looking forward to coming in from the range each evening. anticipating the warmth of the house and the sight of Felicity moving about the kitchen. They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing meals and conversation that ranged from the practical matters of ranch life to deeper topics about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. "Tell me about your father," Felicity said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the red rock formations that surrounded Moab. The air was finally cooling after another scorching day, and the cicadas were beginning their nightly chorus. Grace leaned back in his chair, remembering. He was a hard man, but fair. He came out here with nothing but a dream and a stubborn streak a mile wide. He believed that if you worked hard enough, you could make a life anywhere, even in this desert. He smiled. "My mother thought he was crazy, but she loved him enough to follow him anyway. Did they have a good marriage? They did. They fought sometimes, the way people do, but they were partners in every sense. When he died, part of her died too. That is why she left. Everywhere she looked, she saw him." Felicity nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My parents were like that. When my mother fell ill, my father barely left her side. When she died, I think he just gave up. He followed her less than a month later. I am sorry. Me too." She was quiet for a moment, then turned to look at him. "Do you ever think about marrying? Having a family of your own?" The question caught Grace off guard, though he supposed it was natural enough. "I did once. There was a woman in town, the daughter of the general store owner. We courted for a while, but she wanted to move back east, and I could not leave this place. So she married a banker from Denver instead." He shrugged. "Since then, I have been too busy to think much about it. That is lonely." "It is. But so is wanting to belong somewhere and having no place to go." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw her blink rapidly as though fighting tears. "Felicity, you do belong here. I want you to know that. For as long as you want to stay, this is your home." She reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Grace. You saved my life, you know, not just with the food and shelter, but with the kindness. I had forgotten that people could be kind." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since the day they met. Grace turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers, and they sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The next morning brought trouble in the form of 3 riders who came up the road to the ranch, just as Grace was heading out to check the water levels in the creek. Felicity was hanging laundry on the line, and she froze when she saw the men, her face going pale. Grace immediately changed direction, positioning himself between the riders and Felicity. He recognized the leader as Tom Saunders, a rancher from the next property over, a man with a reputation for being ruthless in business and cruel to anyone he considered beneath him. "Morning, Owens," Saunders said, not bothering to dismount. He was a thick man in his 50s with a ruddy face and cold eyes that swept over Felicity with undisguised interest. "Heard you took an astray. Wanted to come see for myself." "Miss Burke is my housekeeper," Grace said evenly. "Is there something I can help you with, Saunders?" "Just being neighborly. Wanted to let you know that if you get tired of her, I could use someone to cook and clean at my place. I would pay good wages." He directed this last comment toward Felicity, who had moved closer to the house. "I am satisfied with my current position, thank you," Felicity said, her voice steady despite the fear Grace could see in her eyes. "Well, the offer stands. A woman alone should consider all her options carefully." Saunders smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "This is harsh country, Owens. Accidents happen. Would be a shame if something happened to you and left Miss Burke here all alone again." Grace felt anger flash through him, hot and fierce. "Is that a threat, Saunders?" "Just an observation. I will see you around, neighbor." Saunders wheeled his horse around, and his 2 companions followed suit. They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Grace and Felicity standing in tense silence. "That man is dangerous," Felicity said quietly. "I know." Grace walked over to her, noting how she was gripping the laundry basket so hard her knuckles were white. "Has he bothered you before?" "No, but I have heard things in town. Women talk. They say he has had 3 wives and all of them died under suspicious circumstances. They say he owns half the county through intimidation and violence." She looked up at Grace. "I do not want to bring trouble to your door." "You are not bringing trouble. Saunders has been looking for an excuse to expand his holdings, and my land borders a good water source he wants. This is not about you, though he will use any advantage he can find." Grace took the basket from her hands and set it down, then placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "I will not let him hurt you, Felicity. I promise you that." She searched his face, then nodded slowly. "I believe you. But please be careful. I could not bear it if something happened to you because of me." The intensity of her concern struck Grace deeply. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, she melted against him, her head tucking perfectly under his chin. They stood there in the yard, holding each other while the Arizona sun beat down and the laundry flapped on the line. And Grace realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with this woman, who had appeared on his land with nothing but a bedroll and a hollow belly. That evening, Grace rode into Moab to speak with Sheriff Dan Harper, an old friend of his father's and one of the few lawmen in the territory who could not be bought or intimidated. He found Harper at the jail, a small building on Main Street that also served as the sheriff's office and occasionally his sleeping quarters when things got busy. "Grace Owens," Harper said, looking up from his desk with a welcoming smile. He was in his mid-50s, with iron gray hair and a weathered face that had seen too much violence and injustice. "What brings you to town?" Grace explained about Saunders's visit, and Harper's expression grew grim. "I have been watching Saunders for years, but he is careful. Covers his tracks well. The deaths of his wives all looked like accidents or natural causes, but I have my suspicions." He leaned back in his chair. "Your housekeeper, this Felicity Burke, you trust her with my life. Well then, you need to watch your back. If Saunders has decided he wants her, or your land, or both, he will not stop until he gets them or something stops him permanently." Harper stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street. "I will keep an eye on things, and I will make sure my deputies know to ride out your way regular, but you are pretty isolated out there. Might want to think about keeping your guns close and your doors locked." Grace thanked him and headed back to the ranch, his mind churning with worry and plans. He could not leave Felicity alone while he worked the range, but he could not stay at the house all day either. The ranch needed tending, and they needed the income from the horses he trained and sold. When he arrived home, he found Felicity had prepared a feast of roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, with a berry pie cooling on the windowsill. The sight of it, the domesticity and care it represented, made his heart ache with longing for something more permanent than their current arrangement. "You have been busy," he said, washing his hands at the basin. "I wanted to thank you for standing up to those men today, and for going into town to talk to the sheriff." She set plates on the table, not looking at him. "I know you did not need to do that. Felicity, look at me." He waited until she turned, meeting his eyes. "I did it because I care about you. More than I probably should, given that you have only been here a few weeks, but I cannot help it. You have brought life back to this place and to me, and I will not let anyone take that away." She crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and kissed him, her lips soft and warm against his. Grace wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of hunger and hope, and the beginning of something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Felicity rested her forehead against his chest. "I have been wanting to do that for days," she admitted. "I was afraid you did not feel the same way." "I feel the same way." Grace cupped her face in his hands, tilting it up so he could look into her eyes. "I am falling in love with you, Felicity Burke. I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a short time, but it is the truth." "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "You have given me everything, Grace. A home, safety, purpose, and now this. I never thought I would feel this way about anyone." They ate dinner together that night with a new awareness between them, hands finding excuses to touch, eyes meeting across the table with promises of a future they were both beginning to imagine. After the dishes were done, they sat on the porch again, and this time when Grace pulled Felicity close, she settled against him with her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars wheel overhead in comfortable silence. The peace lasted 3 weeks. In that time, Grace and Felicity grew closer, stealing kisses between chores, talking late into the night about their dreams and plans. Grace taught Felicity to ride properly, and she proved to be a natural in the saddle, laughing with delight as her horse galloped across the open range. They worked together to repair fences and tend the animals, falling into a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. Then, on a hot afternoon in late August, Grace returned from town with supplies to find the ranch eerily quiet. The front door stood open, and the curtains billowed out through the broken windows. His heart seized with terror as he leaped from his horse and ran inside, calling Felicity's name. The kitchen was destroyed. The table was overturned, dishes smashed on the floor, and there were clear signs of a struggle. Grace found Felicity's apron torn and lying in the corner, and a single word scratched into the wooden table with what looked like a knife point. "Mine." Rage and fear battled for dominance as Grace ran to the barn for his fastest horse. He did not need to guess who had taken Felicity. Saunders had made his intentions clear. The only question was whether Grace could reach his ranch in time. The ride to Saunders's property took 30 minutes at a full gallop, and Grace spent every second of it praying that he was not too late. Saunders's ranch house was larger than Grace's, a sprawling structure that spoke of wealth built on the suffering of others. Grace dismounted while his horse was still moving and kicked open the front door, his rifle raised and ready. "Saunders," he roared. "Show yourself, you coward." A door opened upstairs, and Tom Saunders appeared at the top of the staircase, a revolver in his hand. "You have got some nerve, Owens, breaking into my house." "Where is she?" "Who?" Saunders descended the stairs slowly, a mocking smile on his face. "Oh, you mean that pretty little thing you have been keeping. She is here, safe and sound. I am just giving her time to think about my offer. Out here, a woman needs a man who can protect her, who has real power, not some dirt farmer pretending to be a rancher. Let her go, or I swear I will kill you where you stand." "You would kill me, in my own home. That would be murder, Owens. The law would not look kindly on that." Saunders reached the bottom of the stairs. "But if you leave now, forget about the girl, I will let you walk out of here. You can find another housekeeper. There are plenty of women who need work." Grace pulled back the hammer on his rifle. "Last chance, Saunders." A sound from upstairs made both men look up. Felicity appeared at the top of the staircase, her dress torn and her lip bleeding, but there was a fire in her eyes that made Grace's heart soar with pride and relief. In her hands, she held a heavy iron candlestick. "I already told you no," Felicity said to Saunders, her voice shaking but determined. "I would rather die than belong to a man like you." "You ungrateful little wretch," Saunders snarled, turning to aim his revolver at Felicity. Grace did not hesitate. The rifle shot echoed through the house, and Saunders dropped like a stone, the gun falling from his lifeless hand. Grace ran up the stairs to Felicity, who collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "I have got you," he murmured, holding her tight. "You are safe now. I am so sorry. I should have been there." "You are here now," she managed through her tears. "That is all that matters." The sound of horses outside made Grace tense, but it was Sheriff Harper who came through the door, his gun drawn and his face grim. He took in the scene with practiced eyes: Saunders's body, Grace's smoking rifle, and Felicity's battered appearance. "Somebody in town saw Saunders's men riding with a woman wrapped in a blanket," Harper said. "I figured it might be your Miss Burke. Looks like I got here too late to prevent bloodshed, but just in time to witness the aftermath." He holstered his weapon. "Self-defense, clear as day. And about time someone put an end to Tom Saunders. That is 4 women he has hurt or killed by my count. Maybe now they can rest in peace." Grace nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Harper arranged for Saunders's body to be taken into town and for a full investigation, though it was clear from the beginning that Grace would face no charges. Saunders's own men, when questioned, admitted that their boss had ordered them to kidnap Felicity, and that he had bragged about his plans for her. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Felicity sat in front of Grace on his horse, wrapped in his coat, and he kept his arms tight around her, as though he could protect her from the horror of what had happened through sheer force of will. When they arrived home, he helped her down and led her inside, where he set about cleaning up the destruction left by the attack. "Let me help," Felicity said, but Grace shook his head. "You need to rest. Let me take care of this. Grace, I am not broken." She took his hands in hers. "I am shaken and I am angry, but I am not broken. What Saunders did, what he tried to do, it was terrible, but he did not succeed because you came for me. You saved me, and I am still here, and I am not going to fall apart." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I was so afraid I would lose you. You did not lose me. You will never lose me." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "I love you, Grace Owens. I think I have loved you since that first day when you offered me food and kindness when you could have just run me off your land. And after today, after everything, I want you to know that I choose this. I choose you. I choose this life we are building together. I love you too." Grace kissed her, gentle and reverent, as though she were something precious that might shatter. "Marry me, Felicity. Not because you need protection or because you have nowhere else to go, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Marry me because I love you, and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you what it means to truly belong." Tears streamed down Felicity's face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Moab, with Sheriff Harper serving as witness, and a handful of townspeople who had come to know and respect both Grace and Felicity in attendance. Felicity wore a dress she had sewn herself from pale blue fabric Grace had bought at the general store, and Grace wore his father's best suit, carefully preserved by his mother before she left for the East. As they stood before the minister, exchanging vows in the small wooden church with the late summer light streaming through the windows, Grace felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This woman, who had appeared on his land with nothing but her courage and determination, was about to become his wife, his partner, his home. "I, Grace Owens, take you, Felicity Burke, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of our lives. I promise to be your shelter in the storm, your companion in joy, and your partner in all things. From this day forward, you will always belong somewhere because you belong with me." Felicity's voice trembled with emotion as she repeated her own vows. "I, Felicity Burke take you, Grace Owens, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with all my heart, to stand beside you in all that comes, and to build a home with you that is filled with love and laughter. You found me when I was lost, and you gave me not just shelter, but a reason to hope again. I promise to spend the rest of my life showing you that you made the right choice in taking in a stranger that day. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Grace kissed his bride, the small congregation erupted in applause. They celebrated with a simple meal at the town hotel, and then Grace drove Felicity home to the ranch in the wagon, both of them grinning like fools as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. That night, they came together as husband and wife in the bedroom that had once belonged to Grace's parents, and that now belonged to them both. Grace was gentle and patient, and Felicity was both shy and bold by turns, and together, they discovered the joy of intimacy built on a foundation of love and trust and genuine partnership. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Grace's hand tracing lazy patterns on Felicity's bare shoulder while she rested her head on his chest. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am more than happy. I am home." She tilted her head to look at him. "Do you remember what I said that first day?" "I said I had nowhere to belong. I remember. I was wrong. I belonged here all along. I just had to find my way to you." She kissed his chest, right over his heart. "Thank you for seeing me that day, for not just sending me away like I was nothing. You could never be nothing." Grace tightened his arms around her. "You are everything." The first year of their marriage was one of hard work and deep happiness. Grace taught Felicity everything he knew about running the ranch, and she proved to be not just a willing student but a natural rancher with an eye for good horseflesh and a gentle hand with the animals. Together, they expanded the operation, buying more breeding stock and building a reputation for producing some of the finest horses in southeastern Utah. When Felicity discovered she was expecting their first child in the spring of 1886, Grace's joy was so complete he could barely contain it. He fussed over her constantly, trying to take on extra work so she could rest, but Felicity would have none of it. "I am not an invalid," she said, laughing at his overprotectiveness. "I am pregnant, not dying. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Grace argued. "Not my wife. Your wife is tougher than you give her credit for." But she allowed him some concessions, letting him take over the heavier chores and accepting his help with more grace than stubbornness. Their son was born on a clear December morning, arriving into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to anyone within earshot. Grace held the tiny, squirming bundle with shaking hands, marveling at the perfect little fingers and the downy dark hair that reminded him of Felicity's. "What should we name him?" Felicity asked, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband bond with their child. Grace looked down at his son, at the new life he and Felicity had created together, and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it took his breath away. "What about James?" "After your brother." Fresh tears filled Felicity's eyes. "You would do that. He was important to you, and I never got to meet him. But maybe this James can carry on his uncle's name and we can tell him stories about the man he is named for." Grace carefully placed the baby in Felicity's arms. "What do you think?" "I think it is perfect. James Owens. It has a good, strong sound to it." James proved to be a healthy, happy baby with his mother's gray eyes and his father's stubborn determination. He grew quickly, thriving in the clean air and sunshine of the ranch, and his parents doted on him shamelessly. Grace would come in from the range to find Felicity singing to their son while she worked, or rocking him gently while telling him stories about everything and nothing. When James was 2 years old, Felicity became pregnant again, and this time their daughter arrived in the spring of 1889, a tiny, delicate thing with blonde hair and Grace's blue eyes. They named her Rose after Grace's mother, and she completed their family in a way that felt divinely ordained. The ranch continued to prosper. Grace's horses were in high demand throughout the territory, and Felicity's skill with a needle brought in additional income as women from Moab and beyond sought her out to make dresses and quilts. They hired a young man named Peter Collins to help with the heavy ranch work, giving Grace more time to focus on training horses and spending time with his growing family. On warm summer evenings, Grace and Felicity would sit on the porch and watch James chase fireflies while baby Rose dozed in her mother's arms, and Grace would think about how close he had come to missing all of this. If he had sent Felicity away that first day, if he had listened to the voice of caution instead of the voice of compassion, his life would be so much emptier. "What are you thinking about?" Felicity asked one such evening, noticing his thoughtful expression. "About how lucky I am. About how different my life might have been if you had chosen to camp somewhere else that night." Felicity shifted Rose to her shoulder and reached over to take Grace's hand. "I do not think luck had much to do with it. I think we were meant to find each other. Two lonely people who needed to learn what it meant to belong. You still think about those days, when you were traveling alone, sometimes, but not with sadness anymore. Those hard times led me here to you, to this life. I would not change any of it, not even the difficult parts, because they made me who I am. They made me strong enough to recognize a good man when I found him." Grace pulled her close, careful not to jostle Rose, and kissed her temple. "I am the one who found a good woman, the best woman." As the years passed, the ranch grew and changed with the times. James grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the horses as much as his father did, and Rose developed a sharp mind and her mother's gift with a needle. Two more children followed. Another son they named Samuel in 1892, and a daughter they called Elizabeth in 1895. And the house rang with the sounds of children's laughter and the organized chaos of a large, loving family. Grace and Felicity grew older together, their faces gaining character lines and their hair showing threads of silver, but their love only deepened with time. They still stole moments alone when they could, still held hands as they walked the property together, still looked at each other with the same wonder and gratitude that had marked those early days of their relationship. In the evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Grace and Felicity would sometimes talk about that first day, trying to remember exactly what each of them had been thinking and feeling. "I thought you were going to shoot me," Felicity admitted one night as they lay in bed. "When I heard that rifle shot, I was certain my life was over. I felt terrible about that. I was just trying to announce myself, but I did not think about how it would sound to someone who was already frightened. What made you decide to help me instead of sending me away?" Grace thought about it, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when his decision had been made. "It was your eyes. When you looked at me, I saw fear, yes, but I also saw courage and determination. And when you said you had nowhere to belong, something in those words struck me right in the heart. I knew what that felt like, that sense of being adrift in the world without an anchor. I could not send you back out into that emptiness. You saved my life. You saved mine too. I did not realize how lost I was until you found me." He rolled toward her, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look at her face in the moonlight. "Do you regret any of it? The hard work, the isolation sometimes, raising children out here away from everything?" "Not for 1 second." Felicity reached up to cup his face in her hand. "This is exactly where I am meant to be. This ranch, this life, you, our children, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me a home, Grace. Not just a place to live, but a real home with roots and love and purpose. They made love then, slow and tender, with the ease of long familiarity mixed with a passion that had never dimmed. Afterward, Grace held Felicity close, listening to her breathing even out into sleep, and sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the woman who had appeared on his land with nothing but a bedroll and broken heart, and who had transformed his entire world. The years continued their steady march forward. James grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch operations, allowing Grace to slow down a bit as age began to catch up with him. Rose married a schoolteacher from Grand Junction and moved to Colorado, but visited often with her own growing brood of children. Samuel followed in his father's footsteps with the horses, showing a natural gift for training even the most difficult animals, and Elizabeth became a teacher in Moab, boarding in town during the week and coming home on weekends to help her mother with the domestic work. Through it all, Grace and Felicity remained the steady center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered droughts and harsh winters, nursed each other through illnesses, and held each other up through the inevitable losses that come with growing old. When Grace's health began to fail in the winter of 1912, 27 years after that fateful day when he had fired a warning shot that changed both their lives, Felicity never left his side. She sat with him for hours, holding his hand and telling him stories about their life together, reminding him of all the joy they had shared. "You remember," she said one afternoon as snow fell softly outside the window, "the first time you kissed me?" In the kitchen, after you had gone to see the sheriff about Saunders, Grace smiled, his eyes closed but his mind clear. "I remember. You tasted like berries from that pie you had made. I thought my heart was going to beat right out of my chest. Mine too. I had been so afraid that you did not feel the same way I did, that I was just your housekeeper and nothing more. You were never just anything." Grace squeezed her hand, his grip still surprisingly strong. "You were always everything from the very beginning. I just needed time to understand that. We have had a good life, Haven, not we, the best life. Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was alone here before you. I love you, Grace Owens. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Felicity. Thank you for camping on my land that night. Thank you for having nowhere to belong, so that you could belong with me." Grace passed peacefully in his sleep 2 nights later, with Felicity beside him and his children gathered around. The grief was enormous, a tidal wave of loss that threatened to sweep Felicity away, but she held firm, drawing strength from the memories they had made and the family they had built together. At his funeral, held at that same small church where they had been married all those years ago, Felicity stood before the gathered crowd and spoke about the man she had loved. "Grace Owens was more than a good rancher, more than a devoted father," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "He was a man who saw someone in need and chose kindness over caution. He was a man who understood what it meant to be lonely and who had the courage to open his heart and his home to a stranger. He gave me everything, a home, a family, a purpose, and most importantly, love. True, deep, lasting love that sustained me through every trial and made every joy brighter. I am who I am because of him, and I will carry him in my heart until the day I join him again." Felicity lived for another 8 years after Grace's death, strong and vital until the very end. She spent her remaining time surrounded by her children and grandchildren, passing on the stories of how she and Grace had found each other, making sure that future generations would know the love story that had started with a rifle shot, and a woman who had nowhere to belong. When Felicity finally passed in the spring of 1920, on a morning filled with birdsong and sunshine, her last words were about Grace. "I am coming home," she whispered to Elizabeth, who sat holding her hand. "Tell the children that I am finally going home to him." She was buried beside Grace in the small cemetery outside Moab, under a shared headstone that read, "Grace and Felicity Owens, together in life, together in death, together forever. I had nowhere to belong until I belonged with you." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from James to his children and their children after them. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original structure that Grace's father had built with his own hands remained at its core, a testament to the enduring nature of love and family. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the red rocks of southeastern Utah, people say they can feel the presence of two souls who found each other against all odds, a lonely rancher and a woman with nowhere to go, who together built a life filled with love, purpose, and the deep, abiding peace that comes from finally knowing where you belong. Their story became legend in Moab, passed down through the generations as an example of how a single act of kindness can change everything, how love can grow from the most unlikely circumstances, and how two broken, lonely people can heal each other and create something beautiful that lasts far beyond their own lifetimes. The land itself seemed to remember them, the creek where Felicity had first camped still running clear and cold, the house still standing strong against the desert winds, and the horses still running free in the corrals that Grace had built with such care. It was as though the very soil had soaked up their love and held it close, offering it up as a blessing to everyone who walked those grounds. James, in his old age, would sit on that same porch where his parents had courted and talk about the legacy they had left behind. "My father taught me that true strength is not about being hard or unfeeling," he told his own grandchildren. "True strength is having the courage to be kind, to open your heart even when you are afraid, to reach out to someone who needs help even when it is easier to turn away. And my mother taught me that belonging is not about where you are born or what you own. It is about finding the people who see you for who you really are and love you anyway." The story of Grace and Felicity inspired countless others over the years. Young couples starting out would visit their grave, asking for blessing on their own marriages. People who felt lost or alone would stand at the edge of the property and think about how Felicity had found her way home, drawing courage from her example. The ranch became more than just a place. It became a symbol of hope, of the possibility of redemption and new beginnings, of love conquering fear and loneliness. In the end, what started as a chance encounter between a lonely rancher and a desperate woman became a love story for the ages, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that home is not a place but a person, a feeling, a choice we make every day to love and be loved in return. Grace and Felicity Owens had found their happy ending, not in fairy tale perfection, but in the messy, beautiful reality of a life built together through hard work, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. They had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create something lasting and true. And in the quiet moments, when the desert wind whispered through the ranch, and the stars wheeled overhead just as they had on that first night when Grace had offered Felicity kindness instead of cruelty, those who believed could almost hear the echo of two voices, forever intertwined, forever home.